a plant the climate in which he grows best. He doesn't just want it, he needs it, as he needs the air he breathes. Molière said, "The most agreeable recompense which we can receive for things which we have done is to see them known, to have them applauded with praises which honor us." My father was a regular and avid reader of the old Zane Grey books. That's how I got hold of them, which invariably, or so it seemed, began with a stranger riding into town. He was tall, lean, always covered with alkali dust. Cool gray eyes peered evenly from under straight brows, and his hand hovered near the six-gun strapped to his thigh. He had no friends or acquaintances, and seemed to like it that way. He was a man of few words, and kept his own counsel. His world consisted of little more than himself, his horse, and usually the bad guy he was after. Well, it makes a good story, and everyone seems to be intrigued by this sort of man of mystery. But in real life, it's a lonely way to live, especially since few of us have horses these days. You can't know too many people, and we'd all be better off if we could overcome our natural timidity where strangers are concerned, if we could open up more. As a friend of mine who has attained an unusually high position in the world says, "Open the doors and windows of your mind and heart to others, and you'll reap a wonderful harvest of friends." Many of us have a tendency to speak or smile only after another person has spoken or smiled at us first. We tend to be reactors instead of actors. It reminds me of the person who sat in front of the cold stove and said, "Give me heat, and then I'll add the wood." The world just doesn't work that way. With a little effort, a person can form the habit of smiling and saying hello first. 19 times out of 20, you'll get a favorable response. I know a man who was a foreign representative for an American electronics firm. He was something of an introvert, and on his frequent flights all over the world, he'd bury himself in a book to keep from having to talk to the passenger next to him. On one trip, a friendly Englishman managed to get a conversation started with him, and it turned out the Englishman was on an electronics buying trip to the States, and a large order resulted. Then and there, he decided to change his attitude toward strangers. While it may not result in another business deal, he's meeting all sorts of interesting people and making many new friends. We should never say he's not my kind of person, or that's not my sort of crowd. Whenever there's a human being, there's a human story. And it's invariably interesting and informative. It stretches our minds, broadens our horizons, and adds to our collection of acquaintances and friends. And all it takes is a smile, the word hello, and a comment or two to get a conversation going. The chances are that the other person is as anxious to add to his collection of friends as we are. But he or she may be just a little on the timid side, as many people are in the presence of strangers. It's true, you can't know too many people. And as we grow older, we should cultivate all the friends we can. The person who shuts others out of his life ends up shutting himself in. Try my friend's advice. Throw open the doors and windows of your mind and heart to others and reap a harvest of friends. Who wants to live with a horse?
Anyone who has ever been called upon to perform before a crowd is familiar with one of the most exquisitely terrifying experiences known to man. It's called stage fright. It, like other fears, must be faced to be conquered. There's simply no other way to whip it, if indeed it ever can be completely whipped. Every actor knows the steel-fingered hand that closes like a giant claw on his vitals during the 30 seconds before the scene begins. Every person who's ever made a speech to a large gathering knows the shadow of fear that stands with him in the wings, the dry mouth, the trembling hands, the quaking in the stomach, and the trembling at the knees. And there's only one logical thing to do. You simply dive in and start swimming. The next time won't be quite so bad, but it'll be very bad for many, many times. I read a little article in Success Unlimited magazine written by Marjorie B. Nagel called The Big Me Within Us. And the story is told that on opening night, before the great Enrico Caruso became famous, he was overcome by stage fright. And as he stood in the wings, his throat contracted with a spasm of terror. Sweat poured from him, and he was on the verge of running away. Suddenly, a thought struck him. He thought to himself, the little me on the outside is strangling the big me on the inside. The me that wants to sing, that can sing, must come out. And then Caruso began a kind of whispered shout. The audience couldn't hear him, but it frightened the other members of the cast and the stagehands. He said in a loud whisper, "Get out of the way! Get out! Get out!" Naturally, they'd all thought he'd snapped, and they didn't know what he was going to do. By the time the cue came for Caruso to make his entrance, the little me had been routed and the big me was in command. After Crusoe finished his aria, the audience rose to its feet, cheering and shouting bravo. A powerful force had been put into the person of Crusoe. Only when he recognized that a weak force was holding it back and acted upon that knowledge did the stronger one come through. The same thing is true for all who perform before audiences, but a similar situation can arise with those who do not perform publicly. Something can come up which almost overcomes a person with panic, the most terrifying of human experiences. And regardless of what it happens to be, this same formula can be made to work to restore the senses and summon up the strength and ability to fight down the panic and attack the situation with good judgment and ability. Each of us is a combination of two forces. The one comprises all of our strength, talent, and abilities. The other is the cynic, the critic, the doubter which tries to bury us in a corner. One must win, and when it's the little cynic, it's because we don't know our own strength. A tiger is being forced to sit on a stool by a little man with a chair in his hand. It's worth thinking about, because certainly an experience like this comes to all of us at one time or another. Swift said, "Although men are accused of not knowing their own weakness, yet perhaps a few know their own strength. It is in men as in soils, where sometimes there is a vein of gold which the owner knows not of."
Dr. Roger Berkman of Houston, Texas, a real expert on people and why they function as they do, has said that we are as we see others. So if you're interested in a deep and truthful insight into yourself, you are as you tend to see other people. If you trust other people, you're a trustworthy person. If you love others, you're a lovable person. Dr. Berkman also has written that we are least tolerant of those negative traits in others that we ourselves possess. When we're suspicious of the intentions of others, it's because our own intentions are often not what we would want others to believe them to be. We create others in our own image. Another Dr. Berkman quotation. We create others in our own image. Soren Kierkegaard has written, "The majority of men are subjective towards themselves and objective towards all others. Terribly objective sometimes, but the real task is to be objective toward oneself and subjective towards all others." Our confidence in people and our doubt about them are closely related to our self-confidence and our self-doubt. Strength and tolerance are partners. Strength and tolerance are partners. I like that one. Really strong people are tolerant people. They're tolerant around children and their wives, with their fellow workers and subordinates, even with their superiors. Strength and tolerance go together. You can make a pretty accurate assessment of your true strength as a person by measuring your degree of tolerance. So how are you doing in the tolerance department? My friend Jack Davis provided me with a good idea in this department. Next time you meet someone who does not behave as you do, no matter what his age, color, creed, or class, instead of asking why he acts as he does, why not, just as a mental exercise, step outside yourself and find out why you act or react as you do? The tolerant person says to himself, when he sees someone doing or saying something that he doesn't understand, "I wonder what his reason is for doing or saying that. There must be a reason there." And remember that we are least tolerant of those negative traits in others that we ourselves possess. I used to become furiously angry at drivers who would block the pedestrian crosswalk at intersections, until one day I found myself doing it. Sometimes it's difficult to see the oncoming traffic from behind the pedestrian walkway, and there's a tendency to pull out on it when there are no pedestrians. Then you're still stuck there when along comes a pedestrian who has then to walk around the front of your car. The teenager who burns rubber pulling away from a stop can't afford a new set of tires, but he wants very much to be noticed. It's his way of saying, "Please look at me. I'm driving a car. Not well, but I'm driving." Young people dress and wear their hair in the current fashion because they want to belong to the group. They don't want to be outcast. We dress to please our own group the same way. Looking behind what people do and keeping in mind their rights will go a long way towards building tolerance. As Kierkegaard put it, the majority of men are subjective towards themselves and objective towards all others. Terribly objective sometimes. But the real task is to be objective towards oneself and subjective toward all others. And here's something we should read or listen to once a day for the next 45 years. It was written back at the turn of the century by William George Jordan. He was editor of several magazines during his lifetime, including the Ladies' Home Journal and the Saturday Evening Post. He wrote, "Calmness is the rarest quality in human life. It is the poise of a great nature in harmony with itself and its ideals. It is the moral atmosphere of a life self-reliant and self-controlled. Calmness is singleness of purpose, absolute confidence, and conscious power ready to be focused in an instant to meet any crisis. The Sphinx is not a true type of calmness. Petrifaction is not calmness, it's death, the silencing of all the energies. While no one lives his life more fully, more intensely, and more consciously than the person who is calm. The fatalist is not calm. He's the coward slave of his environment, hopelessly surrendering to his present condition, recklessly indifferent to his future. He accepts his life as a rudderless ship drifting on the ocean of time. He has no compass, no chart, no known port to which he's sailing. His self-confessed inferiority to all nature is shown in his existence of constant surrender. It is not calmness. The person who is calm has his course in life clearly marked on his chart. His hand is ever on the helm. Storm, fog, night, tempest, danger, hidden reefs, he's prepared and ready for them. He's made calm and serene by the realization that in these crises of his voyage he needs a clear mind and a cool head. That he has nothing to do but do each day the best he can by the light he has. That he will never flinch nor falter for a moment. That though he may have to tack and leave his course for a time, he'll never drift. He'll get back into the true channel. He'll keep ever headed toward his harbor. When he will reach it, how he will reach it matters not to him. He rests in calmness, knowing he's done his best. When the worries and cares of the day fret you and begin to wear upon you and you chafe under their friction, be calm. Stop. Rest for a moment, and let calmness and peace assert themselves. If you let these irritating outside influences get the better of you, you're confessing your inferiority to them by permitting them to dominate you. When the tongue of malice and slander, the persecution of inferiority, tempt you to retaliate, when for an instant you forget yourself so far as to hunger for revenge, be calm. When the gray heron is pursued by its enemy, the eagle, it does not run to escape. It remains calm, takes a dignified stand, and waits quietly, facing the enemy unmoved. With the terrific force with which the eagle makes its attack, the boasted king of birds is often impaled and run through on the quiet, lance-like bill of the heron. No person in the world ever attempted to wrong another without being injured in return, some way, somehow, sometime. Remain calm. Now, although that was written at the turn of the century and in language that today might sound a bit affected and archaic, it's a good message. If ever there were a quality needed in the crisis-filled world of today, it's calmness, and the kind of clear thinking calmness produces. I wonder how improved our days would be if we would make it a point to go over that little message every morning. On the occasion of his 75th birthday, Mark Van Doren, the American writer, poet, critic, and educator, was interviewed by a reporter for Life magazine, and one of the things he said stuck in my mind. I've saved this. He said, "It takes courage to be happy." And in those 6 words, he said a great deal. Any person can wallow in misery and self-pity. It's easy to rail against the world and its injustices. Easier still to sit down and do nothing, like the famous hound dog with its tail in the crack. But it takes courage to be happy. When he said it takes courage to be happy, he didn't mean happiness today or tomorrow or a week from next Thursday. He meant to be happy as a general, relatively constant way of living. To be a happy person as opposed to a generally unhappy person. And it does take courage, courage of a high order. The world is full, it seems, of the "it's too good to last" or "it's just my kind of luck" people who expect bad luck and rejection as confidently as they expect the sun to rise the next morning. They're people who were given bleak and disappointing starts in life. Tolstoy said man is meant for happiness, and this happiness is in him, in the satisfaction of the daily needs of his existence. And La Rochefoucauld said happiness is in the taste, and not in the things themselves. We're happy from possessing what we like, not from possessing what others like. Rudolph Flesch quotes Jane Austen, a passage that I think is very revealing. She wrote, "No temper could be more cheerful than hers, or possess in a greater degree that sanguine expectation of happiness, which is happiness itself." That sanguine expectation of happiness, which is happiness itself. It is in the expectation of happiness that much of happiness itself is found, and it takes courage to expect happiness. Balzac wrote, "All happiness depends on courage and work." I've had many periods of wretchedness, but with energy and above all with illusions, I pulled through them all. My old favorite, George Santa Anna, said happiness is the only sanction of life. Where happiness fails, existence remains a mad and lamentable experiment. Bertrand Russell put it well when he said, "Contempt for happiness is usually contempt for other people's happiness, and is an elegant disguise for hatred of the human race." The Chinese philosopher Lin Yutang said, "I've always been impressed by the fact that the most studiously avoided subject in Western philosophy is that of happiness." A French philosopher said much the same as did Marc Van Doren. He said, "To live, we must conquer incessantly. We must have the courage to be happy." We've all seen people seriously handicapped in one way or another who are wonderfully cheerful and happy people, and we've wondered how they do it. We've said to ourselves, "I don't think I could be happy if I had his or her affliction." These people are happy because they're courageous and because they don't like the alternative.
C.S. Lewis said, "Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, which means at the point of highest reality." In our modern world, with debate over a common sense of morality, we are faced with questions of right and wrong every day. It's not unusual to feel our virtues being tested. Mostly they're small things. But even when a firm system of beliefs are present, choices can be difficult. It has been said that courage is faith put into action. When a person has faith in himself, in his values, and in the worth of the goal being pursued, sometimes the simplest of acts can be the most courageous of acts. Courage is acting on what you are.
My old friend Dr. Harold Blake Walker of Evanston sent me something sometime back that I enjoyed tremendously, and I think he will too. He wrote, "We live by faith, or we do not live at all. Either we venture, or we vegetate. If we venture, we do so by faith, simply because we cannot know the end of anything at its beginning. We risk marriage on faith, or we stay single. We prepare for a profession by faith, or we give up before we start. By faith, we move mountains or opposition, or we're stopped by molehills. Faith, however, is not often tranquil and steady. It ebbs and flows like the tides of the restless sea. Normally, like Browning's bishop, we are forever exchanging a life of doubt, diversified by faith, for one of faith, diversified by doubt. Yesterday, we began the day with confident hope, with trust in his promise. Last night, perhaps after a trying and troublesome day, we were beset by doubt and anxiety. We grope and fumble in search of certainty, wishing we could escape the doubts that haunt us. The peril is that we shall cease groping on through our doubts and live only on our negations. What we need, you and I, is faith strong enough to bear the burden of our doubts. No man ever drilled an oil well without being troubled by misgivings as the drill chewed downward toward producing structures, but only a fool would cease drilling halfway to the hoped-for pool. It was William Morris, the painter, who wrote, "I tell you, it's no joke to paint a portrait. Into the painting of every picture that's worth anything there comes a period of doubt and despair. The artist, however, goes on with his work beyond his doubt to creative achievement. Faith enough to carry our doubts. It's enough. Perhaps it's all we can manage when fears assail and doubts annoy. Maybe we can do no more than grope on through our uncertainties, pursuing the enterprises of our lives in the grim trust that the end will justify the struggle. If, despite our gnawing doubts, we can muster faith enough to take a single step on the road to where we're going, we are on the way to creative achievement. Every triumph of the human spirit begins with one step taken in faith. The single step is the small handle to great matters. No man or woman ever won a worthy triumph without faith to keep on, always able to last at least 5 minutes longer. There's one further thing to be said, namely that worthy triumphs cannot be won without faith enough to maintain our integrity. One of the ultimate tests of faith is our capacity to go on believing that somehow the right is the right, even when right is on the scaffold and wrong seems to be on the throne. All of the great ventures of our lives require faith enough to bear the burden of our doubts, so that we're able to take the first step in the direction in which we wish to go. Enough of faith to keep on going through struggle and strain, and to maintain integrity on the way. I like that. Yes, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, and we need to exchange a life of doubt, diversified by faith, to a life of faith, diversified by doubt.
Let me ask you a rather personal question. What do you believe in? Now, it sometimes seems that there's so much doubt, fear, and cynicism, so much tongue-in-cheek and wise guy elbow rib poking that we've come to the place where people don't believe in anything anymore. People doubt their own capacity for judgment, for knowing what's right or wrong. They wait to see what others do or say before they'll express an opinion of their own. So, what do you believe in? Now, this is not an unimportant question. It's as vital that each of us decides exactly what he does believe in as anything else, and I'll tell you why. It is what you believe in that will determine the course of your life, what happens to you, and your ultimate destiny. The great truth, as you believe, so shall it be done unto you, seems to go almost unnoticed today. But that's the way it works. What you believe in is what will happen to you. For belief is faith, and faith is still the greatest power on earth. A young medical student was being examined by a board of distinguished doctors to determine whether or not he would receive his license to practice. And they asked him, "Why do you want to be a physician?" And he replied, "I've known I was going to be a doctor for as long as I can remember. There's simply no question about it. I'm going to be a practicing physician and a good one." He didn't beg the question. He told them he was going to be a doctor. They had no choice in the matter. The difference between faith and wanting or wishing is that with faith we know what's going to be. With the others, we're only hoping. It's what we believe that makes us the kind of people we are. The greater our faith, the greater we become. People who let others do their thinking for them, who will not venture forth an opinion on any subject until they're sure that what they say will be met with approval and acceptance, do not believe. They conform to a picture of what they think others want them to be like. They are chameleons, ready to take on any hue their surroundings demand. They have no deep anchors of belief, and so drift aimlessly on the surface of life. So when I ask you, what do you believe in, I meant, what do you have faith in? What would you be willing to risk everything you have on, because of the certainty of your belief? If a person believes he's not much of a person, that's what he is. If he believes that he has value, that there's no other person on earth exactly like him, and that he has an important contribution to make, and that he can reach the goals he sets for himself, these things are then true and will come to pass. People remain where they are because they believe that's where they ought to be, and they rise to new heights of achievement and ability because they believe they will. The greatest teachers who ever lived, men whose minds soared far above those of their times and whom we still read and believe, said that according to our faith will it be done unto us. And that, my friend, is the way it works. There are no arguments, no exceptions, no hair-splitting. What do you believe? Then that's what you are. The worst thing that can happen to a person is to lose his belief in something great and important to him. For with belief gone, faith is gone. And when that's gone, there isn't anything left. The name of this book is Edward R. Murrow's book, This I Believe. I talked about this once before on this program, and it's quite a thing. Edward R. Murrow writes in the foreword of the book, he says, "In the autumn of 1940, when Britain stood alone, when the bombers came at dusk each evening and went away at dawn, I observed a sign on a church just off the East India Dock Road. It was crudely lettered, and it read, 'If your knees knock, kneel on them.' I quoted that sign in a broadcast to America that night, but didn't fully understand it. For even in those dark days, I could observe no more kneeling or knocking knees than at the time of Munich. The imminence of disaster brought no spiritual revival, and yet at a time when most men, save Englishmen, despaired of England's life, there was a steadiness, a confidence, and determination that must have been based on something other than a lack of imagination. We all remember the almost unbelievably gallant stand made by Great Britain when she was threatened with extermination. As the months wore on and the nights lengthened and the casualty list mounted, I became more concerned to try to understand what sustained this island people. What belief or what mythology caused them to stand so steady in their shoes? In part, it was ignorance of their own weakness. In part, it was a reluctance to appear obvious by expressing doubt as to the ultimate outcome. But at bottom, this calm confidence stemmed from a belief that what they were defending was good. That Englishmen had devised a system of regulating the relationship between the individual and the state which was superior to all others and which would survive even though cold military calculations concluded that the state was doomed. Well, there was little logic in this British belief. Unconsciously, they dug deep into their history and felt that Drake and Raleigh and Frobisher and Hawkins and Cromwell and all the rest were looking down at them, and they were obliged to appear worthy in the eyes of their ancestors. But above everything else, they believed. They believed not only in themselves, but that they were fighting against evil things, and the fight was worthwhile. No democracy has been nearer the fire and survived than was Britain in that long winter. And one reason for survival was that the nation did not betray the things in which it believed. After Italy entered the war, one of the few murder cases to reach the law lords on appeal was decided. An Italian citizen, long-time resident in Britain, had been convicted by the lower courts of killing a British seaman one night, and the High Court reversed the verdict and set the Italian free. And in the pubs and in Parliament and on the buses and in newspaper offices, this was regarded as the normal functioning of British justice. At a time when German bombers were coming through in the daylight over London, when the Germans were expected on the beaches the first foggy morning, the House of Commons, which might have been destroyed with all its members by one well-placed enemy bomb, devoted 2 days to discussing the conditions under which enemy aliens were being held on the Isle of Man. For the House of Commons was determined that though the island fell, there would be nothing resembling concentration camps in Britain, and the rights under law of enemy aliens would not be abused. That's what the British collectively believed. Sometimes it appears that there's a hidden guide someplace whose duty it is to test men and women through all sorts of discouraging experiences. And those who sort of pick themselves up after getting knocked down and keep on trying arrive. It's an uncanny thing, but it works. And this hidden guide lets no one enjoy great achievement without passing the persistence test, it seems. And those who can't take it simply don't make the grade. And those who can take it are bountifully rewarded for their persistence. They receive as their compensation whatever goal they're pursuing, and that's not all. Because they receive something infinitely more important than material compensation, although they get that. But they get the knowledge that every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage. There are exceptions to this rule. A few people know from experience the soundness of persistence. They're the ones who have not accepted defeat as being anything more than temporary. They're the ones whose desires are so persistently applied that defeat is finally changed into victory. I was reading just the other day about the great Newt Rockne of Notre Dame, who believed and applied this very thing we're talking about. How he had a blood clot in one leg. And his doctors told him that if that blood clot traveled through his bloodstream to his heart, it would kill him. But the Notre Dame team were playing far from home that day, and he insisted on being taken to the game in a stretcher. So they flew him or put him on the train or something. They got him to where the game was to be played. And they took him down to the dressing room where his football players were getting ready for the game. And the perspiration was running down his face, and he was in terrible pain, and he propped himself up on his elbows with a tremendous effort. And he said, "This team you're playing today beat us last year." And he said, "I want you to get out there and win." And it was then that he said, "The team that won't be beat can't be beat." And then he fell back on his stretcher, out of breath and suffering terribly, and the team went out and won the game, and they never lost another game as long as Newt Rockne was alive. because when they saw that the type of courage that he could develop, how persistently he fought to win even though he was flat on his back, well, it made giants out of men. And people who stand on the sidelines of life see the overwhelmingly large number who go down in defeat never to rise again. They see the few who take the punishment of defeat as an urge to greater effort. And these, fortunately, never learn to accept life's reverse gear. But what we don't see, what most of us never suspect of existing, is the silent but irresistible power which comes to the rescue of those who fight on in the face of discouragement. Now, if we speak of this power at all, we call it persistence and let it go at that. One thing we all know, if one does not possess persistence, one cannot achieve any noteworthy success in any calling.
The great Robert Louis Stevenson has long been one of my favorites, not just as a great writer, but as a man as well. Plagued by a frail body and poor health, destined to die at just 44 years of age, he put more living, more travel, and more work and talent into his short time here on Earth than a million so-called average men. The author of Treasure Island, Kidnapped, Dr. Jekyll, and Mr. Hyde, Stevenson once wrote in a small essay, "As courage and intelligence are the two qualities best worth a good man's cultivation." That's good, isn't it? Courage and intelligence. So it is the first part of intelligence to recognize our precarious estate in life, and the first part of courage to be not at all abashed before the fact. A frank and somewhat headlong carriage, not looking too anxiously before, not dallying in maudlin regret over the past, stamps the man who is well armored for this world, and not only well armored for himself, but a good friend and a good citizen to boot. We do not go to cowards for tender dealings. There is nothing so cruel as panic. The man who has least fear for his own carcass has most time to consider others. So soon as prudence has begun to show up in the brain like a dismal fungus, it finds its first expression in a paralysis of generous acts. The victim begins to shrink spiritually. He develops a fancy for parlors with a regulated temperature. The care of one important body and soul becomes so engrossing that all the noises of the outer world begin to come thin and faint into the parlor with the regulated temperature. He makes some important points in those few words, don't you think? The first and most important being that the two qualities best worth a good man or woman's cultivation are courage and intelligence, and that it's the first part of intelligence to recognize our very precarious estate in life, and thus not play it too safely. There's no way to win that game. Tiptoeing through life won't change the final outcome. As soon as too much prudence begins to show up in the brain like a dismal fungus, it finds its first expression in a paralysis of generous acts. The victim begins to shrink and so on. Some people worry so much about the future that they fail entirely to enjoy today. William Lyon Phelps once pointed out that we look backward too much and we look forward too much. Thus we miss the passing moment. In our regrets and apprehensions, we miss the only eternity of which man can be absolutely sure, the eternal present, for it is always now. The fear of life is the favorite disease of the 20th century.